Today I present to you Abe Ace. I previously talked about Abe in one of the clip where I talked about the books, and he was the collaborator, the very important collaborator on the artistic part of the Will James, The Spirit of the Cowboy. Very fascinating book. I'd recommended it at the time. I wasn't sure that he would be able to make the interview because I had heard he had a stroke. He did have a very serious stroke 14 or 15 months ago. Abe is today 84 years old. He has recovered wonderfully well, even though he says that he has been slowed down a lot. Well, when you see the energy he has today, you can imagine the type of man he was before the stroke.
I think that his art is unique, particularly his drawings. There's nothing like them. His gestural line, it's incredible. Skilled artists realize that, and academicians and so forth.
Abe was fortunate enough to have an early retirement in his mid-40s, and at that time he could devote his life to his real passion, which was Western art. He opened a small gallery in Scottsdale that is now operated by his son Gregory.
You know, my father set a great example early on. He worked like a mad fool, and he's enormously passionate, and I've hopefully inherited not his genius, but maybe some of his work ethic.
I would seek out ranchers and cowboys, men that I knew and trusted, that now that I'm in the West, and I would ask them about James's work, and they all came down so positively on it, that he was accurate, and he was nobody else like him. Including Russell. James is all about the cowboy, his working experiences, the reality of the cowboy, and not the Wild West shows and the gunfights and the shoot 'em ups and shoot 'em outs. And so you read James for reality, and his drawings are the same, or that reality. Nobody's matched his drawings, even to this day they can't.
I insisted in interviewing Abe in front of the future Museum of Western Art in Scottsdale. Out of the 45,000 square feet that they will have at the museum, 3,000 will be given for Will James, which is quite a lot. And we were talking about 7% of the surface that will be about Will James.
James is very easy to authenticate, frankly, because of that. You know, the ability for gestural art, action art. He's a master of that. That's his forte, and that's rare. 5% of artists can't draw gestural art. They cannot. Action art. They can't take a horse in a gallop and so on. They can trace it, but they can't draw it. He got with Scribner's in 24 and 23, actually, in the magazine, and he took off like a rocket, and I mean a rocket. God, he was from nobody to somebody. All of us, within a year's time, he was the standard for cowboy art and cowboy story. So he's worthwhile. He had our greatest editor, Maxwell Perkins, from Harvard and Yale. Perkins had Fitzgerald. He had Ernest Hemingway, and he had several others of Thomas Wolfe. He guided James. James never disagreed with any advice he gave him. And he gave him enormous business and literary advice. And thank God that he had an editor like that. In the 30s, during the Great Depression, James books were selling for $2 and $3 at that time. And they sold as well as Wormington and Fitzgerald. And they were two bestsellers. With Will James, my mother read me Smokey. Thank God she did. She read it in 1936. It came out in 26, of course, because I still have the book and the dates in there with my hokey signature, Abe Hayes. And it was a wonderful story, of course, and much admired by me, let alone the rest of the world. Reprinted in about 9 languages, and a bestseller, of course, never out of print. So Smokey started the whole thing. So you might say, from cradle to grave, I've been involved with Will James.